So let me present my screen so that you can work on the warm-up for today. That way y'all can be productive while we wait for your classmates. So I can't see the screen right now, so if one of y'all would unmute your mic and just confirm that you can see that green slide.
Yes.
I can see it.
Awesome, thank you. So you'll go to www.menti.com in a separate window, and you'll use the code that's given there, and you're going to answer that question. And you can take a moment to do that. Did I take it away? I did, right? So I was trying to take attendance. Okay. So what are three things you think all living things must be able to do, or three things that they have? And just off the top of your head. All right, so Lauren, are you present?
Present.
Lauren here. Carlos, you're here. Cessa. David, good morning. Isabella Gora, good morning. Karen, good morning. Maya, good morning. For those of you that just joined us, good morning. You're going to go ahead and go to www.menti.com. It's at the top of that slide. And using the code that's provided for you, you're going to answer the question. And you'll see that. You will see your classmates and your answers pop up. We'll see which ones are the most commonly used. So, Ken, good morning. Presley, good morning. Sonia, good morning. Sophia, good morning. Sydney. Madison. Johnny, good morning. Christopher, good morning. Okay. All right, good morning. So it's 8:15. It's officially the beginning of our class period, and we'll be here until 9:05. Before I go over yesterday's assignment and we start today's lesson, if you haven't already, if you're just joining, you're going to go to menti.com and you're going to use the code at the top. And the question that you're answering is you're going to think of three things that you think all living things must have or be able to do. Off the top of your head, we're not looking up answers. We'll talk about what they are today, but I just want to kind of what we think, right? What do we think that a living thing must have? Like if we were the first scientists to define life, what would we use to kind of classify life? Okay, so I see some answers. Okay, and I'll give you until about 8:17. So when you all check into the beginning of class, I'll take attendance. I know those of you that were here earlier, I have you already marked. And for those of you that are coming a little later, I'll be checking throughout the period. Make sure that y'all stay until the very end, unless I dismiss y'all early. Today I am going to want to call on some of y'all to participate. If you hear your name, you can unmute your mic and you can go ahead and answer. Okay, so it's 8:17. I'll give you about one more minute, but I do want everybody to have an opportunity to brainstorm. Just check it out. Lilian, good morning. Got you as present. Kalilian, Isabella, good morning.
Yes.
Just saying good morning. I have you as present. I just saw.
Okay.
Nathaniel, good morning. I see you here. It's present. No. Some of y'all were here earlier, so if you don't hear your name, it's because I caught you earlier. But before we leave, I'll go ahead and make them call out your names just make sure I got you. All right, so it's 8:18. You guys can continue answering if you haven't, but let's take a look at what y'all have. All right, so I see a lot of good responses. Water, food, air, the ability to breathe, right? Those are things that we often think of. Energy, right? That's a good one. Be able to die, right? Interesting, yes. Okay. To feel, to reproduce, have sight. Okay, so what is a living thing and what defines a living thing? And oftentimes when we think of living things, which is biology, right? Biology is a study of life, so it's important to define life. We think of animals, right? We think of ourselves. And so oftentimes students say, okay, well, what can we do? We're living. We have to be able to breathe. We have to have organs, right? Like a heart and a stomach and a brain. We have to be able to move. But oftentimes when we just focus on the animal kingdom, we neglect the other living things on our planet, like plants, like bacteria, like fungi. And so when we kind of limit ourselves to the animal kingdom, we kind of limit our ability to define life. And so if we were to kind of look more broadly, okay, well, what does a plant have that we can do and they can't? So having organs is not necessarily a characteristic of life or necessary, because as a plant, your leaves are considered organs, but if you're a bacteria, then you don't technically have organs. So definitely, what do we both need? We both need energy, right? We get it through our food. Plants get it through sunlight. Bacteria get it from eating things in their environment. It could even be ourselves sometimes, right? If we're being decomposed. So definitely energy. Water is super vital to life. Plants need water. We need water. Fungi need water, right? Like mushrooms thrive on moisture and water. But there are actually some bacteria that don't require it. So whereas we talk about characteristics of life, as essential as water is to life on this planet, not all living things require it. So definitely energy, right? Ability to reproduce, that's a good one, right? As a living thing, you have to make more of your kind. So can plants reproduce? Can animals reproduce? Can bacteria reproduce? And so as we talk about that today and we talk about life, keep in mind that living things are not just limited to animals and to ourselves. So we're going to kind of look more broadly as to what does the living thing have to have across every single kingdom on this planet. But you guys came up with some really good answers. So what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss what a living thing must have in order to meet that characteristic of life, right? The parameters for life, because it is biology. And we'll go ahead and define that. So before we get to that, just to kind of, I know we're kind of setting the template, or like, how should I put it? We're setting the guidelines for how we'll start our class. And so this is an example of what we'll start. So Menti is one thing that I'll be using, which is an ability to brainstorm. We can see kind of all your live responses. I'll also be using Padlet like we used the first day. So you'll have some sort of warm-up activity in the beginning. So make sure that you're showing up at the latest 8:15 so that you have enough time to work on that, okay? So, and then I was able to get your attendance, which I'll call back at the end just to make sure that I caught everybody. So before we get started on today's lesson, I want to talk about yesterday's assignment. So I'm going to go over to Google Classroom. Okay, so yesterday you were looking at lab safety. Lab safety is a lot of common sense, right? We shouldn't eat things that we don't know what they are, right? We shouldn't eat things in the lab if we're not familiar. We should definitely protect our eyes if we're working with chemicals or any sort of debris. And so yesterday, y'all were given an article to read, right? Well, what is the most dangerous piece of lab equipment? And it actually turns out it's not anything that you would think would be like an actual piece of lab equipment. It's us, human error, because you'll find that there are going to be individuals who can have accidents or incorrectly use the equipment that's available to them. So you guys were working on this. I saw that the majority of you turned it in. If you haven't, make sure that you do turn that in. This week, I won't be penalizing the assignments, those 10 points. So let's say, for example, next week, if you would have turned this assignment late, it would have been -10. The highest grade could have gotten is a 90. But I know that we're kind of getting used to the whole online doing work or opening documents. So one of the things that I did see is that some of y'all were struggling with opening the assignment. And so we, up here, okay, just for future reference, you would go to open with, and you have the option to open it in several ways. And I'm gonna open it in Google Docs. And hopefully it'll load. I know I had a little bit of trouble earlier today, but that should give you an opportunity to type on it live and then download it and then submit it. I know you guys have other ways. I saw like Cami exports. Some of you maybe just copy pasted the questions or saved it and did it on your computer. As long as you're getting that in there, you could have also done a hard copy. You could have answered the questions. And so in the future, if you want to do it, like if you want to write it out, if you prefer that, you won't have to write the questions. Okay, just write the responses in complete sentences. So it's giving me a little bit of a hard time loading, but that's an option that you guys have. So just to talk about the article a little bit, there were a lot of things that went wrong here because of improper use of lab equipment or just negligence. We saw a lady who got feces thrown at her from a primate that an ape, right, that she was working with. And since they're so humans and primates are our closest living relative in terms of genetic similarities, we have a lot of the same diseases. And so she caught, I believe it was hepatitis or herpes. As a result, it was herpes B, and she died. One lady wasn't wearing her hair up, right? She had long hair. She wasn't wearing it up in a ponytail. And a lot of times we're like, well, why is that even important, really? But in her case, it got caught to a spinning machine she was working with in a physics lab, and she was strangled herself. And she also broke the rule that we shouldn't be working by ourselves in a lab. So normally you'll have a lab partner. She had a lab partner. So that lab partner could have gotten help or stopped the apparatus. So human error. And high school labs have more of that than anything because we have younger and experienced lab workers, right? We've got middle school, high school. We don't maybe do labs all that often, so we're not as experienced. And also the equipment is really not up to date. If we have an opportunity to go back to class, you'll see that our classroom is kind of outdated, and some of that lab equipment is too. So unfortunately, the high school lab setting is not really as decked out with safety equipment as maybe some you would have it at like the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which you guys saw, right? Biosafety level 4, where they've got like extraction of fumes in case something becomes airborne or bacteria. And with lab safety, it doesn't just apply to the classroom setting. If you go into medicine, you will be exposed to many, many hazards, from infection to chemicals, medications, needle pricks, a lot of things that you need to be cautious of. And so you guys considered a couple of those. Okay, so if you haven't turned this in, turn it in. We're not going to go super in depth because a lot of it is common sense. But before we get into our labs, when we go back into the classroom, we'll review the ones that pertain to a particular topic. Like we're going to burn a Cheeto and a marshmallow to look at caloric content, like which one has more energy. And so we're going to light it on fire to simulate metabolism. And we'll review fire safety, right? How we can use a fire blanket, how to use an extinguisher. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to point out about safety, and I'm going to call on one of y'all to let me know what's wrong. And this is kind of also where safety goes into the real world, right? Because we also have to keep ourselves safe. And so when we think lab, we just think, oh, but we're not in labs very often. But, right, going to that last question, protecting ourselves. So I'm going to call on, what did I have here this morning? Madison. So here is a mask, right? And we can use this right now to protect ourselves from COVID viruses, right? Because we can have viruses going through the orifices in our face. Okay, Madison, can you tell me how I'm using this incorrectly?
You don't have it over your nose.
That's right. And so a lot of us think, oh, well, I'm good, right? I'm protected. But we have three openings in our face. We have our mouth, we have our nose, which both lead to the respiratory tract, which is what COVID wants. And we also have our eyes, which have mucous membranes. So we definitely want to make sure to be safe. I don't know if you guys can see me, right? You can? Can you see me? I don't know. Anyone, can you kind of mute yourself? Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so you want to make sure that you protect those
No.
orifices that lead to the respiratory system. No? Okay, I'll see if I can fix that. And they've even recommended even wearing goggles, right, for those that want to be extra safe, or a face shield to protect the eyes. Okay, so let's continue. And what we're going to go into now is we're going to look at the lesson for today. So go ahead and open up your Google Classroom and go to the classwork little tab. Come back over here. I'm trying to see if I can pop up, because I know some of y'all, I guess you don't really need to see me anymore right now because we're going to be working with the notebook, but it was just for like the mask demo. Okay, so let's go to where it says Wednesday Interactive Notebook. And each of you should have received a copy of this biology interactive notebook using Google Slides. So I'll give you a moment to find it and open it. Okay. All right, when you open it, you can see you can type your name. So I would encourage y'all to personalize it, put your name. And what we have right now are 3 slides that we're going to use for today's lesson. There are some tabs on the right. They don't really match up. We can ignore those for now because I'm also using this template for my other class. You can see that we're going to be looking at lab safety, and we'll be looking at the characteristics of life for today. So the goal for today, and I expect some issues with technology. This is the first time I'm using a notebook in this way, and that you're opening it right for the first time. So when issues arise, I'll come back right now, just touch base with y'all. So I'll stop showing my screen, and then we'll look at some issues that arise. So if you are a person that prefers like a hard physical copy of a notebook, you can see how it's like set up. You can do this in a sheet of paper as well. So if you prefer that to actually typing it in, you should be able to type. So if you click on those, okay, you should be able to type. Also, if you're looking at your notebook, if that's too small for you to comfortably read, you can zoom. So there's a zoom option, and you can zoom as we go through this. So the goal of today is for you all to use this as I go through the presentation. So I'm not going to have this open and fill it in with you simultaneously. What I'm going to have on my end is I'm going to have the presentation for today. And as we go through it, I don't know if you guys can see that I switched my screen. As we go through it, you'll be writing the characteristics, which are underlined, and I'll read them out to you as well so you know exactly what to write in that little slide. So let me come back because I think I have a, oh, it's okay with you. Just jump in where we started. Okay, so coming back here, you'll go ahead and define as we go through it, right? You'll interact, or you can do it on your own separate sheet of paper if you prefer that. And we're going to get started here at the beginning. So everybody should have their copy open. Okay, and I'm going to project mine. And then for this part, we're going to do this part together. So I'm going to project mine, and then you can fill yours in. So we're not going to spend, as I mentioned, a lot of time on lab safety because it is a lot of common sense. Don't pick up broken glass with your bare hands. Don't throw it in the trash can because the janitor might, cut themselves when the glass penetrates the bag. So a lot of it is just like common sense, really. So here you have the rules for you to keep, right? You have a copy of them. And what we are going to put together are units. So when we're working in the lab setting, we're going to use the metric system. And the metric system in our, I guess, realm is really only used in science because in the United States, We use the customary system to make measurements. So if somebody asks you, how tall are you? And you'll answer, okay, well, I'm 5'6". We have a reference for that. Okay, 5'6" is about this height, or 6 foot, like the person 6'5", we know that they're very tall because we work with those units often. That is how pretty much everything's set up when we buy groceries, when we're working with measurements at home, when we buy a ruler, right, we'll see inches. But these measurements are not what we use in science, which can sometimes make it a little confusing. Now, if somebody were to say, well, I'm 60 centimeters tall, that's a little bit harder to kind of wrap your head around because we don't use them often. So sometimes when we're working in labs, right, we have to make measurements. It's part of collecting data. We sometimes don't know what to use if we're working with liquids, if we're working with maybe a solid like a gummy worm, which we hopefully we'll get back to and work with a real worm and compare them, or for example, length. And so just to kind of have a reference, because putting the units is really important, we're going to work right here on the left-hand side. So this part I'll do with you all. And I just accidentally, I don't know if I clicked it, I opened something different. So let me come back here, stop presenting. Okay, so for mass, let's see, Carlos, when you think of mass, what comes to mind?
Weight.
Right. The weight of something, how heavy is it? Perfect. And so we're going to add that here. We're going to use this more for solids. We're going to think weight. So like powders, a gummy worm, a leaf, if you want to take the length of the leaf, or sorry, the mass of a leaf. So we're going to use more of these units for a solid. We want to get how heavy it is. We want to see its mass. So we're going to be using grams, right, which are just with a G. If it's very lightweight, we're going to use milligrams, mg. We can also use centigrams, we can use decigrams, but more often than not, we're either going to use grams or milligrams. One of the labs that I hope that we get to do is we're going to take an egg and we're going to use it to simulate a cell. We're going to put it in vinegar, and then we're going to take that, the mass, right, the weight of the egg before and after it's been in the vinegar, after it's been in corn syrup, after it's been in water. And so we will be using grams or milligrams. So we want to make sure that we use those units. If you want to set it apart from like the notes, like, okay, this is the actual note part, you can also add color to your text, right? Whatever color you want. You don't have to, but that's an option, right? So you can distinguish your notes from what I provided. So let's look at volume. When we're working in the lab and we're working with volume, what comes to mind? Let's pick on Sophia Alanis. What comes to mind, like what kind of things would you want to take volume on?
When I think of volume, I think of like what's inside, like, you know, like in math when they give you like cubes.
Right, so that the
Usually
space,
that's what comes to mind.
you're right, the space that something takes up, it could be a cube. For our purposes, liquids can take up space, right? So we could fill a cylinder or a cube or one of those pieces of equipment here, like a beaker or an Erlenmeyer flask with a liquid, right? It fills up that space. Oftentimes for volume, if we want to see, like, we're going to need 10 milliliters of water, we'll use the liters, okay, which we'll abbreviate with the L. If we're going to take very small amounts of volume, we're going to use ml. On average, the human body has about 4 to 5 liters of blood. And that's actually a lot because a liter is a lot. It's like this much. I believe, no, if you lose 4 to 5 liters, you can actually die. You would have more than that, but if you lose 4 to 5, we can actually bleed to death. Our body will start to shut down. So milliliters are very small amounts of liquid. Like, for example, we would use like a graduated cylinder. Okay. We can also use centiliters, deciliters, kiloliters, although we're not really going to use those in our classroom. Okay. And then for length, Johnny, have I called on you already, Johnny? Johnny Hernandez going once, Johnny Hernandez going twice. I took a bathroom break. All right, let's go with Miss Isabella. I have 2 Isabellas. Let's go with Isabella Bechtold. when you think of length, what kind of things do we take the length? What does it mean? Length.
When I think length, I think regular objects. So a cube, anything like that, that you can take the line of a straight edge.
Okay.
Or the measurement of a straight edge.
Very awesome. So measurement of a straight edge. Well, let's see. Length. Would you say how long or wide it is for that object?
What do you mean?
Like, would you say when you think length, can length just be like a straight edge this way or a straight edge this way, like length and width? Like, let's say we want to take the width of the egg.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
It's okay. Can we use, okay, well, let me go to units over here. What units, and I'll go ahead and put this here. What units would we use for length in science? It would be inches or feet. And thank you, Isabella. And let's call on, yes, straight edge. We want to take the length, or we want to see how long it is, right? Let's go with Chris Vasquez. Do you know the units that we would use for length? Inches or feet in customary, but in science?
No, miss.
Okay. We would be using meters. You guys heard of meters? More often than not, you've heard of centimeters or millimeters, which are very, very tiny in science, really, really small. If you have a ruler, they're super tiny. So for length, we would take, oftentimes it is a straight edge, right, because we use a ruler. We could do the size, right? We could do the size of something. You can see how it did this with mine. You can also change the font. So if that bothers you, that it did that and it's not looking like the others, you can change the size. And in science, for temperature, I want to see how cold or hot something is. We're going to use degrees Celsius. Okay, and we would abbreviate that with the C. Capital C, and then the little degree sign, just for sake of time, I'm not going to put it, but if you can do it on your end, you want to be accurate when you have that. So I want you to reference this when we do labs, or if you get data, right? If you already, because it's going to be a little, we're not going to be able to meet to actually conduct a lab, and some of you may not have access to rulers, or maybe the measuring cups, right, that you have don't come in these metric units. But when you get a data set and you look at the units, that can give you an idea. Oh, they were taking the mass of something because we're seeing grams, or we're seeing how heavy something was. Or, oh, we're working with milliliters, that was some type of liquid. Or, oh, we're looking at millimeters, that was the size of something, right? They were using some form of ruler. And always, always, always make sure that you write your units, because if we're taking the mass of an egg and I just put 5, that's 5 what? Could it be 5 milligrams? Could it be 5 liters? 5 cats? You know, you need to be very specific about what exactly you were measuring. So it's really, really important to always write your units. And this is so important that I'm going to highlight it. Because oftentimes students will lose points because they don't put the units. I mean, obviously I can assume that they were, like, if we're measuring the mass of something, that they were using grams, but in science, we don't want to make assumptions, right? Because we could make some very serious mistakes if we're not clear on the data, right? Okay, so like right now they're doing vaccine trials. If those scientists are not being very accurate and specific about the dosage that they were injecting into a patient, if they're, you know, they're examining that COVID vaccine, then that could really harm the patient. Or we're not going to have parameters to use for other people if we're not accurate and if we're not using the right units. Okay, so you guys have that to reference. We'll be using that throughout the year. Okay, what we're going to get into now is actual bio part. And we're going to start by defining biology. And I'll do this, biology and organism, with y'all, and then the rest of you will do on your own, and I'll share a presentation with y'all. So biology, OG, right, the study of, so we have geology, we have some other OGs. There are other, OG, right, the end, OG is the study of, and biology is the study of life. So I'm just typing that in, the study of life. And in order to study life, we need to define life. And so we did that a little bit in the warm up. When we think of life, we have to consider all of the different kingdoms that are on this planet that are living. And so breathing is not something that all living things get to do. Having a heartbeat is not something that all things need to be able to do. Essentially, movement is not something that all living things need to do. So we want to make sure that we define that so we can understand life. And so when we talk about a living thing, an organism is referred to as a living thing. So rather than saying this maple tree is a living thing, it's an organism. And so when you see the word organism, as we go through the chapter, we go through the unit, an organism is a living thing. If you were a living thing, like a thing, well, that's kind of just very general. But if you are a living being, or if you're an organism, or you have life, Galilea Moreno, what we call a living thing, and this is reviewed from 8th grade, so to the best of your ability, a living thing is biotic or abiotic?
I think biotic.
Very good. So anytime you see biotic, that is something with life. The first unit we're going to cover is ecology. And as a living thing, we're going to interact with other living things. Like right now, there are bacteria on our body. There may be, you may have a pet, right? You're interacting with another person maybe in your house. But we're also going to interact with non-living things of our environment, which would be abiotic, like the temperature in your house, like the computer, a piece of paper. And so we'll look at the interaction between biotic or living things and non-living things. But let's look at exactly what a living thing must have. And so this is where y'all are going to go in and we'll type the characteristics as we go through them together. I'm going to present this so that you can kind of see when it's presented. You see how it has a little hand? You can actually click that picture. And I'll give you time to work on this tomorrow too, but you can simultaneously go through this as we're going through the unit today. So you see one right in your notebook right here, right? But when you click on that, you're going to get a document and you're also going to put it here and why that characteristic is important. Why is it important to have access to energy? Why is it important to respond to a stimulus, right? So you're going to give me the why it's essential for life, and then you're going to provide me an example. We're going to go through some examples together. You can use the examples that I used today in class, or you can come up with your own. You can type an example. So a dog, which is not something that we're actually working with, I'm just being very general. Or you can go into the internet and pick a picture. So if you're a very visual learner, you can find pictures and fill those little boxes in with pictures. Otherwise, you can type those in as we go. Okay, so that is, if you're kind of lost as to where I found that, here in your copy of the notebook, which is in Google Classroom, right? So you have it right here. Here's the Google Classroom. You open up the notebook. You should have been following along with us. And when you open it, you have to go into the presenter view. I know it's lagging because I'm following along on my phone just to kind of see where, rather than, because I can't see you, I'm like, it's a blind spot for me. But if you go to the present view right here, I'm going to wait for it. It's not there yet. Okay. It'll open it, and that's when you can click it. Okay? And then you can click that document. So you can work on it today as homework, but I'll give you some time tomorrow as well during your asynchronous day. So tomorrow we won't be meeting live, but you'll have something to work with. Okay, so let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to start my presentation, and as we go through it, you're in your notebook, and you are filling it in, okay? So in order to really have an understanding of life, we need to know what it is that all living things must have. So we call those the characteristics of life. And so there are 9 that out of every single living thing on the planet, and you think of all the billions of organisms, these are the 9 characteristics that every single one of them must have to be living. Okay, so the first one that we're going to start off with, and you don't have a copy of this in Google Classroom, so make sure that you're following along with us today, and I'll take that into consideration for pacing. For number 1, we're going to write, have at least one cell. So you see where it's underlined, and number 1 in your notebook, you're going to put have at least one cell. When you go into your table later, you're going to put have at least one cell. At the most basic level, a living thing has to have just one cell. That's it. You have one cell, you're living. Can y'all think of any organisms that have one cell? And since I can't see you guys, I'm going to call on somebody. I'm going to call on Isabella G now. Can you think of a living thing that has just only one cell? It's a little bit challenging, but can you think of something? I'll give you a clue. It makes you sick.
Makes you a
and-
virus?
All right, a virus makes you sick. That's right. But we're going to see that a virus actually is not a living thing. It's going to actually use our cells, but it doesn't have cells. What else can make you sick other than a virus? Starts with a B. Anybody want to jump in?
Bacteria.
Bacteria. That's right. That's right. So bacteria are living things, and they're just one cell. And that one cell has the ability to give you a staph infection, pink eye, acne. All of these things are caused by bacteria. Now, we're going to go into the difference between bacteria and viruses because they can both make us sick. But here's the thing. Can you kill a living thing? Anyone? Yes, you can, right? You can kill a living thing. If you get an infection with a bacteria, you can take that sucker out with an antibiotic, right? You take some penicillin, you take some amoxicillin, you take some sort of antibiotic and it kills it. And usually you'll take it for 7 to 14 days until you kill them all. Boom, you're good to go. With a virus, why can we not just take some medicine like that and boom, pandemic over, we're back to our normal lives. We can go and have fun with our friends. We can go back to class. The thing is, a virus is not a living thing and you cannot kill a thing that's not living. So a virus makes us sick and a virus will kill our cells, which is why ultimately we're going to see that all living things are organized. So if you kill your cells, like if we have a virus killing our cells, that's going to kill our tissue, the tissue in our lungs, right? And if the tissue in our lungs dies, that's going to kill our organ, right? Which would be the lung. And if the lungs can't work and get you oxygen, then that's going to, affect the whole human being. And so at a very basic level, a living thing must have a cell. And a virus, unfortunately, is not, it's not unfortunate, but it's not living, so we cannot kill it. All we can do is treat the symptoms that it causes, right? Oh, if it's not letting the person breathe because now it's affecting their lung tissue, we can try to help the person breathe. We can't kill the virus for them. Do you know what body system has to kill the virus for the person? Anyone?
The blood cells?
The blood cells, do you know which ones? White or red?
The white ones.
The white ones, right? So the immune system has to work right and it has to work for us. But at a very basic level, we have to be made of at least one cell. If you've got one cell, check. You're considered a living thing because a cell is in itself living. So number one, they have cells. All living things must have at least one cell. Number two. Oh, and by the way, living things are organized. So we'll see that maybe you're just one cell. Maybe you can build on those cells and you can get some tissue like muscle or bone. Maybe you can then build on that tissue and put more tissue together and get an organ, right? We have a heart or a leaf. A leaf is considered an organ. Roots are organs in plants. Flowers are considered organs. Flowers are actually the reproductive organ of a plant because plants can reproduce sexually, which is kind of interesting. But when we talk about that, pollen are actually the sperm cells of the plant. So there is organization. The more cells you have, the more they can organize. The reason we can't see bacteria is because bacteria is just one cell and we cannot see one cell without a microscope. If you put cells together, then you can see tissue, you can see skin, you can see muscle, right? If you eat meat, you can see the muscle. So the more we put together, the more visible they become. Okay, so number two, living things produce offspring. Now, some students will say, well, miss, what if I don't want kids? Does that mean I'm not a living thing? Not at all, but you have the ability as a human being, as a Homo sapien, right? As a species, we can reproduce. So number two, all living things must be able to produce offspring because ultimately this is how we continue the species. There are organisms, right? There are living things that have gone extinct because there were so few of them that they couldn't meet up to reproduce, right? So if you think of the extinction of some animals, maybe there were so few of them, they couldn't meet together in the wild and they could no longer propagate their species. And just to kind of give you an idea of how important reproduction is for the survival of a species, if there was a law that went into action, or let's say COVID took away your ability to reproduce, and so let's say everybody at some point got infected with COVID, it would take 100 years for humans to go extinct. One of the most dominant species on this planet, it would take 100 years to go extinct if we just stopped reproducing. Why? Because most human beings will live around 100 years. I mean, not most, I'm sorry. The average life expectancy is 75 years of age. Some will live beyond that. So if we take the kind of outliers that live longer than that, it would take about 100 years. That's quick. And so we know that we have species that have lived on the planet because we have their fossil records. Maybe people were already around to document their existence, like the dodo bird, but they're gone now because they were not able to reproduce. There were so few of them that there is eventually their species went extinct, right? So reproduction, and when you look into the chart, right, when you're talking about the significance of reproduction is necessary to continue the survival of the species, to keep it going. And when we talk about evolution this year, we'll talk about how some living things will adapt to their environment. This pandemic has changed our way of life, and we've all had to adapt to that. And so for organisms that maybe cannot adapt or that are not able to survive the viral onslaught, it's going to affect your survival, right? And so we'll look at how factors can affect the propagation of the species as well. Number 3, all living things must grow and develop. So you have to add new tissue. So we'll watch some videos right now. Growth, and this is important. I don't know if you can fit it there in your notes. I would put it in the little table. But what growth is referring to is growth of new tissue, right? So when we think of growth, we're thinking, okay, well, I was once a sperm and an egg. The sperm and egg came together. They made more cells. 9 months later, I had a full organ system. And then I kept growing because I was a baby and now I'm a teenager. Are you done growing? No, you're going to continue to grow bone, muscle, hair, all that stuff. So growth is the increase in living material. If you get cut, right, if you go through surgery, that skin will repair itself and that muscle will repair itself because your cells will continue to reproduce, right? Cells are living things, so they can reproduce, they can make more, and that's going to increase that and fix that damage, right? Or you're going to grow in length, so you'll continue to add more bone. And then development is if we take all of the changes within your lifetime, right, from when you were an infant until old age, that's considered the development. That's all of the changes. And so if you look at that picture, right, we see some seeds. Let's see. Cami, can you give me an example based on that picture of what growth would be? What growth do you see in that seed? Cami Williams, are you there? Okay, Miss Cami. I'll go ahead and go to Nathaniel. Nathaniel, what's some growth that you see there?
In the picture?
Yes.
Oh, the seed is growing into a little sapling, or not a sapling, but little.
Yeah, right. That's right. So what do you see in the third picture of that seed that's starting to grow? What parts of that plant?
The root has started to grow farther into the ground, and it is
Mhm.
starting to sprout out of the ground in order to.
Perfect, right? So we see the growth of the roots. That's right, and we can see the progression. We see new root tissue, and then we see the leaves, right, and the stem. Very good. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. That's growth. So the roots growing, the leaves, and the stem growing. Something really interesting. Programmed within that seed are genes that cause the roots to grow down into the ground and the leaves and the stem to grow up against gravity. So it's really neat because this seed, we would think it's not a living thing. It doesn't. I mean, obviously, if we're using like very general parameters to define life and we say, well, it's not moving, it's not doing anything, it's not responding if I push it, but it is a living thing because it does respond to water, right? If you put the seed in soil and water, it's going to respond. And the genes that are programmed within it cause the roots to grow into the soil because the purpose of the roots is to absorb water and nutrients. So they're programmed to grow in with gravity. And then the leaves you can see are green because their purpose is to go look for sunlight to make food for that plant. So it's super cool that within that seed, there's already all this programming taking place for the growth of that material. There's definitely cells in there, right? The seed itself is for reproduction. Development is if we start from beginning to end, all of those pictures are development. Okay, so here we see development. We can see those eggs for that frog, and then we can see the changes within that organism. That's development. Growth would be like the little tail, the growth of the limbs, right? The little legs. That would be growth. All of everything put together, that's development. So just so we can kind of see it in action, click this. So the roots growing there into the soil, is that growth or is that development? You guys can chime in. Anyone? Growth. Yes, I think I heard it. Yeah, that's growth. So as we continue to watch it by the end, all of that growth put together is development. Okay, pretty cool. And then we should see that they're going to respond, the leaves are going to respond to sunlight because the goal of the leaves is to make food for the plant. So we're going to see energy is super vital to living things. Okay, we didn't see it in that video, but when we look at response to stimuli, you'll see that. But all of that is growth, and it's kind of cool because we don't really see that happening because all this has been sped up and they've taken these shots through time, but you can see that they're growing, right? There's that growth and development. I had another one on skin healing, because when we think about growth, it's not just getting taller, it's not just a plant growing, but it's also healing. So cells do reproduce, and that's important to heal. So I have this skin here. I don't really need the music, but I want you to kind of just see, okay, so that's an injury right there. All right, and with time, those cells that were killed and damaged are able to reproduce. So cells themselves reproduce, but we see growth of new tissue. Do y'all think that our cells reproduce more efficiently and faster when we're old or when we're young? Anyone?
When you're young.
Young.
When you're
Young.
young, that's right. When you're young, your cells are really good at reproducing. As we age, our cells are not as good. And so if you have an elderly person that breaks a bone, they may never repair from it. If you sustain organ damage, right, your organs are made up of cells, you may not heal as well. And so COVID patients that usually have the worst symptoms and sometimes have the worst outcomes are elderly patients because their cells are not able to repair the damage caused by the virus. As a young individual, because your cells are very good at replacing themselves, you won't suffer some of the serious consequences that in other people will. Now there are exceptions, right? Because we have heard of little kids getting very ill, but yes, when you're young, your cells reproduce the fastest, the quickest. They're very good at that. Okay, the next characteristic of life, I believe it's number 4, is respond to a stimulus. So a stimulus is anything in our environment that causes a reaction. Okay, so if we were in the classroom setting, the bell is something that most students will react, okay, it's time to go, right? If you're asleep, that's going to wake you up. A fire drill, that's a stimulus, like the bell during a fire drill. But light is a stimulus. So if those are some sunflowers, light will, for example, stimulate new plant growth or new leaves. If there's not enough of it, the plant may try to make more or less depending on how much light there is. Our eyes respond to light. When you go back into the movie, and when the movie theaters open up and you go back, right, when you go in there, it's gonna be really dark at first and your pupil has to adjust. And when you walk out and it's super sunny out, your eyes take a while to adjust, but you're responding. When somebody passes away or when a living thing is dead, they're not gonna respond anymore. So sometimes you'll see paramedics when they get to help a person, they'll shine a light in their eyes. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to get the eye to respond to that stimulus. And if it's not, then that's an absence of life. If you can no longer respond to your environment, then there's no more response. For humans, our nervous system helps with this, but for plants, they have chemicals that help them to respond to their environment, like light and water and things like that. And so within our environment, we respond to temperature, we can sweat, right? We respond to light, we respond to sound. Inside our bodies, some stimuli that our cells can respond to are hormones. Bacteria, if there are bacteria in there, will make more white blood cells to fight them. So things like that, ion levels. So being able to respond to your environment is super important. I'm looking at the time, it's 9:01, so we'll do 2 more. And then we'll pick up tomorrow. The next characteristic of life, number 5, is to maintain homeostasis. Now we're gonna spend some time this year talking about homeostasis, but basically living things have to keep a constant, always. Constant temperature, 98.6. If you're not at 98.6, something's wrong. And 98.6 is an average. So out of all the human beings on the planet, this is the average that they've come up with. So if you're 97.3, does that mean that something's wrong with you? No. If you're at 99.2, does that mean that you're sick? Not necessarily. But there are some values that definitely show illness. So if you're running a temperature of 101, that's not right. And your body is telling you that that's not right. And you're gonna feel ill because your body is trying to go back to normal. So if you're outside and your body temperature goes up because of the sun, you're going to sweat. You're going to turn red because your blood is going to the surface to cool you off because there's a lot of heat. And so our body will react to that stimulus, right, to keep us alive. And so our body doesn't really like change, doesn't like drastic changes. And so it will always try to go back to normal. And that's what homeostasis is. Once a living thing no longer is alive, it doesn't matter if it's 105 degrees, like 200 degrees outside, you're not going to sweat anymore. Plants are not going to grow more leaves. Bacteria are not going to care, right? Because they can die with very high temperatures. There's no reaction. And we'll spend some more time talking about that. And then the last one for today, living things have to be able to pass on their DNA, right? And that's what reproduction is for, but there has to be DNA or genetic instructions to pass on because our cells need instructions. Are we going to make curly hair or straight hair? Are we going to make you 5'2" or 6'2"? Are we going to make animal cells or are we going to make plant cells? And so all of that information is found in the DNA. And so you have to be able to pass on those instructions to the cells that you make, which eventually will be passed on to your offspring. And if you do have children, you're going to mix your instructions up within yourself, but also you're going to join them with someone else's instructions. And so you're going to get a new combination, but you're still giving them the instructions that you have. Okay, so that's number 6. So just to recap, you should have number 1. I'm going to come back to the beginning. All living things have at least one cell. All living things must produce offspring. They have to make more of their kind. They have to grow and develop. They have to respond to a stimulus, right? Something in their environment. They have to react to it. And they have to maintain homeostasis and hereditable DNA. Okay, so tomorrow we'll go through 7, 8, and 9. Or not tomorrow. I'm not going to see you tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow you're going to have an assignment online. You'll work on the assignment that I left you. And so I'll put this up for you guys to use as a reference. But you're going to be working on this tomorrow. You already have a copy of it. So if you want to work on it today, you have a slow day, you can do that. But tomorrow we're not meeting yet. Yesterday we did because it was like the second day of school. But we're not going to meet tomorrow. We'll meet again on Friday. We'll continue and then we'll start with ecology. Okay? Are there any questions? Just let me do a roll call real quick. I have for today Sophia, Elian, John, Isabella, Noe, Lauren, Maya, Isabella G, Johnny, so I have Isabella B and G, Samuel, Sydney, Galilea, Caesar, Madison, Karen, Carlos, David, Jesus, Chris, Presley, Nathaniel, and Cami. If I called your name, you are dismissed. If I didn't call your name, stick around so I can get you marked as present, okay? Bye, guys. Have a great day. I'll see you on Friday. Bye. So, Carlos, you're here. Got you. Derek, you're here. Derek. I'll see you, but I'll write you down. Okay, thanks, Derek. Bye. Izar, I got you. Thank you. Bye. Karen O, I got you. Very, thank you. We'll see you tomorrow or Friday. Carla, I got you. Thank you so much. Sebastian, I got you marked as present. And Uriel, you're good to go. I'll see you Friday. Bye.
Did you get me marked as present?
Who's talking? Sorry, I can't. It's because I can't see.
Tuba?
Tuba. No, Tuba, I didn't have you. Thank you.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.